All right, so welcome back. We're going to start talking about the kidney itself now. So let's just talk about functions of the kidney in brief here, and then we'll expand upon this in the upcoming videos. So one of the main jobs of the kidney is to regulate blood ionic composition. Now what that means is your levels of sodium, potassium, calcium, and chloride, particularly, in your blood. So if you have high levels of sodium, you'll lose that in your kidneys. If you have high levels of potassium, you'll lose that in your kidneys. Conversely, if you have too little sodium in your urine, too little sodium in your blood, or too little potassium in your blood, your kidneys will reabsorb them in greater quantities. We'll talk more about how it helps regulate pH, mostly through the excretion of either hydrogen ions or bicarbonate ions. We'll talk about how it helps regulate blood volume. And whenever we talk about regulating blood volume, we're going to talk about how it helps regulate blood pressure, because the moral of that story is the more water you are reabsorbing, the more water that you have in your bloodstream, the greater your blood volume will be. I think that makes sense. And the greater your blood volume is, the greater your blood pressure is. Okay, I think we know that intuitively, right? If you lost a lot of blood, you'd realize your blood pressure drops, right? But if we, not necessarily lost blood, but just had whatever same amount of blood, but we add water to it, like we hydrated, our blood volume increases, our blood pressure increases. And then we'll talk about the renin and angiotensin system in greater detail and exactly how that works. It helps maintain blood osmolarity levels, so that is that osmotic concentration of the blood. So basically how, you kind of think of it, how concentrated or how dilute your blood is. The kidneys will produce different hormones. It'll also help regulate blood glucose levels, as well as it'll help release glucose into the bloodstream from gluconeogenesis, as well as reabsorb glucose that might otherwise be filtered in the urine. And then obviously it helps excrete wastes and other foreign substances. So foreign substances being something like, I don't know, like some drugs that you're taking, and not necessarily the illicit kind, but obviously that's what shows up in like urine tests and stuff like that. Right. So again, here are two kidneys. You're looking at the T12 vertebra here. So these are the last two ribs. If you remember back to 201, those were the floater ribs. Again, right kidney is a little bit lower than the left kidney due to the liver. They are also located retroperitoneally, meaning that they're behind that behind that parietal peritoneum. The hilus, okay, is on the concave side, so on this side is the hilus. Again, that's where vessels, nerves, tubes enter and exit. So it's the same idea as with what we saw when we talked about the respiratory system. And then there is an actual capsule, a connective tissue capsule around each kidney. Okay, so let's just take a look at this image. So what we're looking at is a view. So here's the individual. It's a transverse cut, and we're viewing it from below. So if we had taken, in this case, this woman's upper section as we cut her, and now we're looking like up into that section. Okay, so we're seeing here, this is the liver. So this is posterior, anterior. So this is going to be right, left. So here we see the liver, part of the stomach, pancreas. You're seeing the kidney, in this case, right kidney. There's going to be this nice fatty capsule around it. That'll be really, and I shouldn't say fatty capsule. It's the renal capsule is connective tissue, but around that is this adipose capsule that basically helps protect the kidneys from any kind of trauma. Your ribs, those last two floater ribs, do a pretty good job protecting them, but again, the kidneys do such an important function that you're going to try to keep them protected from any kind of bruising, right? And then here's the other kidney. You can kind of see how the blood vessels are going back. You can see here's the peritoneal layer, and they are indeed behind that peritoneum. Okay, and actually, like when you're looking at this, really close to your spinal column. All right, so when we take a look at the inside anatomy of the kidney, one of the things that you're going to notice, again, so here's that capsule. We have sort of this outer layer right here. Okay, this sort of outer lighter layer, that's going to be the renal cortex. This part going from where this bracket is all the way down to here. So all of this area, including everything in it, is going to be the renal medulla. Okay, the renal medulla. And then this area in here is the renal pelvis. That's where all these different collecting ducts and calyces are coming together. I should say calyces are coming together to take the urine from the kidney down to the bladder. And you have in this area sort of, these spaces. There's nothing necessarily in those spaces, they're just spaces. Those are called the renal sinus. And I should say that, those renal sinuses don't have anything in them as far as like blood vessels and stuff like that go. What they will have in there kind of cushioning them and filling them out is just some fat. Okay, so what we're also seeing in this renal medulla area, so all of this area in here, you're seeing there's some blood vessels that travel through there. And then you should notice these triangular darker areas. Those are called renal pyramids. And then there are these lighter areas in between the pyramids. Those are called renal columns. Okay. And you're seeing this little yellow thing right here. That's called a nephron, along with its collecting duct. That's going to be the functional unit of our kidney. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. Okay. When we have blood coming into the kidney, it's coming in via the renal artery, right? And that renal artery is a fairly large blood vessel, so it's going to have to split into smaller capillaries so we can actually filter the blood. And you do need to know this order of how blood flows through the kidney, so please make sure you make note of this. In a lot of ways, it's not that bad. It kind of repeats itself. So basically, we go from the renal artery. When that splits, it becomes a segmental artery. That's going to split into the interlobar artery, and then that's going to split into the arcuate artery, into something called the interlobular artery. That will take blood to the afferent arteriole, and that'll break down to a little capillary bed called the glomerulus. And then blood leaves via the efferent arteriole, and then it'll either go around the tubules up here, and if that's the case, it's called the peritubular capillary, or it goes down the tubes in this loop. If that's the case, it's called the vasa recta. And then from there, it simply reverses the order. You go to interlobular veins, into arcuate veins, into interlobar veins, into segmental veins, and then back into the renal vein. So essentially the veins and arteries are named the same thing. The only place where you get slightly different ones is right in here. Right, so all the yellow that you're seeing here, that is called a nephron, and it is the functional unit of the kidney. That is where all of the filtration is going to be occurring. So each kidney has about 1 million nephrons. By what I mean by the nephrons are found in both the cortex and medulla. So what you're seeing here in this image, cortex is from this dotted line up, medulla is from the dotted line down. So the nephron extends from the cortex down into the medulla. So it extends through both areas. Okay. So the nephron consists of a vascular and tubular component. So the vascular component are all these this sort of purplish what you're seeing here. The peritubular capillaries, or the vasa recta, are the purple is the vascular part, and then the yellow is the tubular part. So what we're going to see, and this is kind of a nice image, so blood again is going to come in the interlobular artery into the afferent arteriole. It goes into this little capillary bed called the glomerulus, and this is where urine is going to be filtered. So basically think of it kind of like a colander. You're going to have, I should say blood is getting filtered. Blood is getting filtered, and fluids, electrolytes, different things are being filtered out, and they're being caught by this yellow capsule that fits around that ball of capillaries. And then that fluid is going to get sent down this tube network, right? Down, down, down. So it goes all the way down, up, over, back around, over, until we get into this collecting duct. And all through that journey, it's getting processed. Things are being taken out, things are being added into it. And then you'll notice all the blood vessels surrounding that, because basically if you're taking things out of this yellow tube, well, it can't just go into like no man's land. It's going to go back into your bloodstream. Similarly, if you're going to put things into the yellow tube, well, where are you putting them in from? You're putting them in from the blood vessels. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the glomerulus a little bit. We'll take a closer look at this. We have our afferent arteriole. Again, this is the flow of blood. That afferent arteriole splits into the glomerulus, and right now you're seeing the glomerulus being covered by cells called podocytes. So you're not seeing the actual blood vessel itself. Here they removed them and cut the blood vessels in half, so you're seeing all the little red blood cells. And the glomerulus is very porous, meaning that things will filter through. Okay, like smaller things can filter through, and again, it's being caught by that capsule and then sent down that tubular network. It actually does look like that. It is fairly recognizable. It looks like this in our underneath our microscope. Maybe not this color, but you kind of get that nice sense of that jumbly kind of squiggly blood vessels. That's our glomerulus. Okay. So again, that Bowman's capsule is going to collect any of that fluid going in from the afferent arteriole, being filtered by the glomerulus, filtered out of the glomerulus. It gets sent down the tubules, and the first part of the tubule is something called the proximal convoluted tubule. And then you get into something called the loop of Henle. Right? This loop right here is the loop of Henle. It has two parts. It has a descending limb, and then it has an ascending limb. And then you have a distal convoluted tubule. And then many distal convoluted tubules will join into a collecting duct. Okay? And then you have different types of nephrons. You have ones that are juxtamedullary nephrons, and then you have what are known as cortical nephrons. So simply meaning that, like here's a cortical nephron, it ends up staying a little bit more in the cortex, whereas a juxtamedullary one is going to go way down into the medulla. Okay, some just dip down into the medulla further than others. All right, so once we filter that blood from the glomerulus, again, Bowman's capsule captures it. It gets sent down the proximal convoluted tubule, down the descending limb of the loop of Henle, up the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, into the distal convoluted tubule. Then we get to that collecting duct, which is what you're seeing here, right? That is going to filter into the papillary duct in the renal pyramid. Again, this darker area is the renal pyramid. This is the papillary duct down here toward the bottom. And then basically that urine that has been formed will drip down into this minor calyx. And you're seeing several minor calyces in this image. Those minor calyxes will come together to form a major calyx. Those major calyces will all drain into the renal pelvis, and then eventually that renal pelvis leaves the kidney as the ureter on its way down to the bladder. So just a urine formation preview. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. Well, we'll talk quite a bit more about this in greater detail. But again, blood's coming in, afferent arteriole. Here's our glomerulus, the actual, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. The actual blood vessel capillary network. The blood capillary network, it'll filter out into, it gets caught by that Bowman's capsule. And you're seeing this term renal corpuscle here. Basically what the renal corpuscle is simply the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule together. So again, the glomerulus is the blood vessel. Bowman's capsule is the yellow capsule around it. And when you talk about them together, it's called the renal corpuscle. Okay. So anyway, fluids, ions will be filtered out of the blood vessel, out of the glomerulus, caught by Bowman's capsule. They will then, and you can see this, it creates a plasma-like filtrate of the blood. Again, it flows down the proximal convoluted tubule, and you have tubular reabsorption, tubular secretion. So again, things that are useful are being reabsorbed back into the blood, which is what you're seeing here with this sort of orange arrow. And then you have tubular secretion, which means that things that we don't want in our blood that didn't get filtered out in this initial glomerular area are put into the tubes. And then later on in the tubules, we have water conservation, where we reabsorb any water that might otherwise be lost in urine. All right. And I'm actually, we're at 15 minutes. I'm going to stop that right there instead of continue on to the next section. So, if you have any questions, make sure you email me. All right, see you guys next time.